My boyfriend went missing during the operation to close in on the criminals. When we found him, he had already forgotten me and was with another girl. I tried every means to bring him back. But when that girl appeared again, he softened his heart. I'm already married to you. What else do you want? Will you only be satisfied when you force her to death? I quietly watched all this. Finally, heading to Stowaway of Fauna, I believed that he was no longer the person I had been waiting for. When I saw Nightingale again, she was wearing a mini skirt that barely covered her thighs and selling yogurt at the entrance of the mall. Zephyr's hand that was holding mine stiffened. I followed his gaze, and my heart sank heavily. 2 years ago, when we found Zephyr in a remote fishing village, the girl beside him was this very one. How should I describe her? Beautiful and bright. When she looked at Zephyr, her eyes would turn into curved crescent moons. Just like I used to be. Shall we go and take a look? I asked him. But my heart couldn't help feeling uneasy. Zephyr glanced over inferently. In just an instant, his gaze fell back on me. Daisy is still waiting at home. Daisy was the name of our daughter. Hearing him say that, my heart seemed to relax a little. I pulled Zephyr and walked quickly towards the parking lot. But when we passed by the elevator, we were still noticed by Nightingale. There were tears in her eyes as she stared blankly at Zephyr's back, not even noticing that the yogurt was overflowing. The man standing in front of her roared, "Are you blind?" It spilled all over my sleeve. Only then did Nightingale react and quickly took a tissue to wipe the man. Probably not wanting Zephyr to find out her embarrassment, she deliberately lowered her voice. "I'm sorry, sir. How about you take it off and leave me your address? I'll wash it and send it back to you." But the other party was relentless. "Wash it? Do you know how much this piece of clothing costs? Even if you were sold, you couldn't afford to compensate for it." By then, Zephyr was already a bit unhappy. His face seemed calm, but it was filled with coldness. Hearing the man scolding, Nightingale bit her lips tightly. When she looked at me, her eyes were full of grievance. Until the man put a fat and greasy hand on her shoulder, and suddenly softened his tone. "Sister, you can turn much money even if you stand here for a whole day. How about this? I'll give you an address. Come over tonight. You don't have to compensate for the clothes. And you can even earn some money. What do you think?" Zephyr suddenly squeezed hard, making my waist ache on the side. He softened his heart again. He couldn't forget those 6 months of companionship. Nightingale lowered her head and said softly, "I won't go." Seeing this, the man was about to lay his hands on her. Finally, having fulfilled my obisari, just before he was about to tear open Nightingale's coat, Zephyr let go of me. I held onto him tightly and reminded him, "The security guards will be here soon." But he didn't even spare a glance at me. "Aurora. I'm a policeman." In full view of everyone. He left me behind again. I suddenly remembered that before he went on the undercover mission, he had also said to me like this, "Aurora. I'm a policeman. I have to go." But this time, was it also for the sake of his duty? I don't think so. The first time I saw Nightingale was 3 years after Zephyr went missing. Director Zhang called me and told me that he had been found, but the blood clot in his brain was pressing on the nerves. And now Zephyr couldn't remember anyone. I said it didn't matter, as long as he was alive. But when I rushed to the fishing village and saw Zephyr by the seaside, there was also a delicate and beautiful girl beside him. They were barefoot, picking up seashells on the beach. Occasionally, when the girl saw a beautiful one, she would bring it over and ask Zephyr if it was nice. He would always smile, rub the top of the girl's head, and then echo, "It's nice." I had of course seen that smile before. A long time ago, when he stood in front of the desk and watched me do my homework. He had that doting look. The setting sun was like molten gold, and the afterglow of the sunset cast a halo over them. It was so beautiful that it was unbearable to destroy. I just stood there blankly. And it was his colleague Solace who pulled me and dragged me into the car. "Sister-in-law, if you want to cry, just cry. It's not good to hold it in all the time." In the car, Solace thoughtfully handed me a tissue. I thought I would cry. But it seemed that my tears had dried up in the year he went missing. And I couldn't shed any. I touched the ring hanging around my neck and barely squeezed out a smile. I thought that when I saw him again, I would give him a big hug. Perhaps my smile was too ugly. Because Solace looked at me with a sad expression. Maybe he understood then. My reunion with Zephyr was destined to be a tragedy. Do you need to deal with it? Do you need to deal with the fish entrails? Deal with it. I stood beside Zephyr and watched him skillfully clean out the fish's belly. I remembered that when I just graduated, I was diagnosed with malnutrition. In order to help me improve my health, Zephyr often bought fish back. At that time, he was also like this. Squatting by the sink, scraping the fish scales and being cocky. Aurora. Aurora. It's really your blessing to have me. 16 yuan and 30 cents. The cold and stern male voice pulled me back to my thoughts. I fumbled for change in a flustered manner. This village relied on the sea for a living and had little contact with the outside world. Mobile payment hadn't been popularized yet, so we could only pay in cash. Zephyr looked at me in a flurry and there was a lot of inquiry in his eyes and brows. Until Nightingale lifted the curtain and walked in. It doesn't matter. You can take it back first. It's the same if you pay next time. Hearing this, Zephyr handed the fish to me. Since Nightingale said so, you can take it. As he spoke, he stood up and naturally took the cloth bag from Nightingale's hand. I remembered the day I agreed to be with him. Zephyr held me in his arms and smiled freely. Anyway, you're already mine. From now on, whatever my wife says goes. He still remembered those words. It's just that the person he was fulfilling them for was no longer me. A sharp blade seemed to cut open my chest, and the pain made it hard for me to breathe. I took the fish that was used as an excuse and fled in a hurry. That night, I had a dream. I stood outside the fish store and asked Zephyr hoarsely why he didn't want me anymore. And he just looked at me once and then said, "Because I don't love you anymore." His tone was plain, but it was blunt and hurtful. I woke up in a cold sweat. The feeling of having no one to rely on swept through my whole body. And the person who once said he would protect me. Who was he by the side of now? Nightingale was the youngest daughter in the family and had been doted on by the elders since she was a child. When it was heard that people from the capital came to pick Zephyr up, uncles all came to support her. In their hearts, Zephyr was already Nightingale's fiancé. Without her permission, no one could take him away. Sister-in-law. We can't rush this. It still depends on what Zephyr chooses. Solace put the files that could prove his identity in front of Zephyr. Zephyr was taken aback and lowered his head to read them. He read very quickly. But in my eyes, those few minutes were longer than several years. It was only when he said, "I believe what you said is true," that the heart that had been clenched finally relaxed. The old policeman who brought him had said that Zephyr had an acuteness engraved in his bones. Before we came, he must have detected something wrong with his identity. Then what about you? Who are you? He suddenly turned to me. You claim to be my girlfriend. But there's nothing about you in the materials. How ridiculous. As an undercover agent, I didn't even have a single photo together to prove our relationship. In the silence, it was like a basin of cold water was poured on my face. Nightingale cried pitifully, "No wonder you've been coming to buy fish these past few days. You had bad intentions." When Nightingale said this, all the relatives around stood up. I was in a strange place. And Solace quickly protected me behind him. At the same time, Zephyr also pulled Nightingale to his side. His arm was half around her, slightly shielding her. It was an instinctive protective gesture, as if he was afraid that she would fall due to being angry. I suddenly remembered that Zephyr's ideal type was a delicate and weak girl like Nightingale. Even he himself found it incredible that he had fallen in love with me. A dignified old man stepped down from the main seat, waved his hand, and asked everyone to put down the farm tools they were holding high. "Girl, since he doesn't remember you anymore, why don't you let it go? Next month, my son is going to marry my daughter. If you two come to the wedding banquet, you're welcome. If you're here to cause trouble, don't blame us for being rude." The meaning of these words was very clear. I was like the supporting female character who was cannon fodder in those cheesy novels. If I was sensible, I should have made a glorious exit at this time. But I was young then and did things without considering the consequences. All I could think about was that if everyone could just let it go, Then what did those 3 years of sleepless nights I had count for? What did giving up the promotion to take care of his parents count for? And what did giving birth to our daughter, at the risk of my life, count for? All the grievances in my heart erupted at this moment. I was already so sad. Only when everyone was unhappy together would I feel a little better. In the chaos, I threw the photo of our daughter on the table. No more words were needed. That face would explain everything. Daisy's eyebrows and eyes were very much like what Zephyr looked like when he was young. Did he want to forget me? Did he say that the past was in the past? I definitely wouldn't allow it. Don't you care about me? And don't you care about our daughter either? We had been childhood sweethearts for more than 10 years. I knew what he valued the most. He was a man who would rather die than give up his responsibilities. There was silence. A long silence. Zephyr stood there stunned. The faces of everyone in the room also changed. The way they looked at me was like looking at a witch who was ruining a good marriage. I didn't expect them to understand me. Without experiencing what I had been through in those 3 years, no one would understand my unwillingness and resentment at that time. Adhering to the concept that family scandal should not be made public, Nightingale's father dispersed the crowd. Zephyr picked up the photo and frowned tightly. Solace spoke at the right time. Zephyr, what sister-in-law said is true. Daisy is really your daughter. That day, Zephyr sat in front of the hall for a long time. He looked at me quietly, and his gaze slowly moved from Solace to me. After lingering for a while, he finally lowered his head. I'll go back with you. Nightingale burst into tears immediately, and turned around and ran into the main room. Not long after, Zephyr also followed in. He lowered his head and said something. And then a clear slapping sound came out. After that, we went back to Kin City together. As he said, he took responsibility for me and for Daisy. Although the wall he built in his heart blocked me from getting close, it also cut off his own delusions. I had nothing to criticize about him. Until Nightingale appeared again. I knew that the wall was about to collapse. When Zephyr came back, Daisy had already fallen asleep. I was lying on the sofa and was also a bit dazed. He bent down and picked me up. It's cold here. Go and sleep in the bedroom. The familiar scent came over me, and I instinctively clung to his neck. Perhaps tiredness had weakened my self-control. In the moonlight, I was actually possessed by the devil and kissed his lips. Zephyr instinctively dodged backward. But in half a second, he realized something was wrong and lowered his head and obediently let me. It had been 2 years, and he still wasn't used to my kisses. Daddy and Mommy. How embarrassing. In the awkward moment, Daisy woke up at some point and stood at the door, dragging her strawberry bear. A look of helplessness flashed in Zephyr's eyes. He turned around and picked up Daisy, saying, "Sorry. I woke you up." Daisy shook her head. "No. I wanted to go to the toilet." Only then did I realize that I had been so focused on thinking about when Zephyr would come back that I had forgotten to take Daisy to the bathroom. By the time we finished dealing with everything, it was almost 12 o'clock. After taking a shower, Zephyr tiptoed and lay down beside me. "Is Nightingale settled?" I asked him. Solace had told me that Nightingale was Zephyr's savior. If she hadn't dragged the unconscious Zephyr back onto the boat, he wouldn't have had a chance to survive. So it's impossible for me, and I have no right, to stop Zephyr from helping her. "Yeah, ha. I sneaked out. I bought her a plane ticket. And she'll go back tomorrow." He turned over and pulled me into his arms, his voice full of exhaustion. "Go to sleep. Don't think too much." In fact, he also knew what I was worried about. But we both wanted to maintain the illusion of peace, and neither of us was willing to be the first to expose the truth. Under the quiet moonlight, I softly replied, "Okay." In his cold embrace, I stayed awake with my eyes open until dawn. On the weekend, there was a high school class reunion. Unable to resist the urging of the old class monitor, Zephyr took me and Daisy with him to the reunion. The little one was naturally outgoing. Not only was she not timid at all, but she also performed a newly learned dance in public. Now the uncles and aunts loved her even more. They took turns feeding Daisy, and there was no chance for me and Zephyr to take over. So Zephyr was left with only one task, which was to take care of me. He sat beside me, occasionally helping me pick up food and serve soup, and thoughtfully picking out the chili peppers from the dishes. Some classmates saw this and couldn't help but tease. Yo yo yo. You two have been so affectionate for more than 10 years. That's enough. There are still single people in the class. What's this? Have you forgotten the time when we took the graduation photo? Zephyr bribed the whole class just to stand next to Aurora. He finally managed to marry her. Not to mention asking him to pick out chili peppers. Even if Aurora asked him to pick out manure, he wouldn't say no. What are you talking about? We reading. Everyone burst into laughter. However, in Zephyr's eyes, I sensitively caught some different emotions. Detachment, indifference, and apathy. In fact, I can understand all of this. His memory hasn't recovered. When he listens to others talk about our past, it's like listening to the story of a stranger. It's just that the protagonist of the story happens to have the same name as him. Before long, a drunk female classmate came over and put her arm around my shoulder. Hey, Aurora, weren't you quite fond of spicy food before? Why don't you eat it now? Upon hearing this, Zephyr's face turned pale. I can't remember who said that people who are nostalgic always lie like scavengers. Over the past 2 years, I have picked up the fragments of my memories countless times and carefully presented them in front of him. But he still only wants to remember what he wants to remember. Yes, I was born and raised in Sichuan and Chongqing. I've loved spicy food since I was a child. The person who needs him to pick out the chili peppers has never been me. As we clinked glasses, I gave a faint smile and said, I'm not in good health. So I quit. This is probably the last bit of dignity I can think of for myself. It seemed that out of guilt. After that day, Zephyr became even more obedient to me. But I could feel that something between us was dying. Sometimes he would stare blankly at the shells that Daisy had picked up. When he wasn't busy, he could sit there for an entire afternoon. For him, life seems to be only about daily necessities, Daisy, and a distant dream. I don't know how to describe this feeling. Obviously, having fulfilled my desire, he has done everything perfectly. When my father was hospitalized with pneumonia, he stayed by his side all night despite the dissuasion. When the news said that there was a pervert lurking in this area, he would pick me up from work without fail. When Daisy had a high fever when she was a child and lost her hearing in both ears, he was afraid that she would feel different from others. So he taught himself psychological knowledge to counsel her. My colleagues all praised him for his stable emotions and envied me for finding such a gentle husband. Only I know that it's because he doesn't love me. He won't run through the crowd and hold me tightly in his arms like he used to. He won't secretly come over and kiss me while I'm cooking either. This is also the most frustrating part for me. Obviously, having fulfilled my desire, there are countless signs that he doesn't love me. Yet the way he used to love me is deeply ingrained in my heart. One night when I couldn't fall asleep, I sat in the living room writing and drawing. After putting pen to paper, the dull pain suddenly lessened. So I picked up the habit of keeping a diary again. Besides Daisy's physical condition, I mostly wrote about the past when he loved me. But as I wrote, I couldn't help but make comparisons. Because I have seen the way the flowers bloomed for me. So when they wither, I know it better than anyone else. I naively took out the graduation photo and pointed at those familiar or unfamiliar faces, telling the story of our encounter and reunion over and over again. Other than that, I don't know what else I can use to contend with their passionate 6 months. I only have 15 years. 15 years as plain as water. But after doing this many times, Zephyr got annoyed. He pressed my finger down and furrowed his sharp eyebrows. Can you stop talking about the past? That was the first time he showed me such an expression. Anxious, having fulfilled my desire, unhappy, and even annoyed. Each emotion was like a sharp knife stabbing deeply into my heart. So cruel, making me bleed with every strike. But why? Holding back my tears, I poked his chest and questioned him. It was you, Zephyr, who knelt on the ground and begged me to marry you. It was you who promised me with great determination that I should wait for you to come back. I spent 3 years in despair. How can you just forget all that? Tears streamed down my face. Zephyr didn't expect me to react so strongly. He opened his mouth but didn't know what to say. He looked at me for a long time, then let out a heavy sigh, lowered his head to apologize, and turned around and left without looking back. He silently resisted my unreasonable behavior, with his silence. It's the most ineffective, yet the most effective way. After the argument abruptly ended, I looked at his departing back, and my heart felt as if it was wrapped in vines, and I couldn't breathe. Why have we become like this? I still love him. Obviously. Why did he change so suddenly? But before I could figure out this problem, life dealt me another heavy blow. Nightingale didn't leave. One day, when Zephyr got up early to wash up, I saw an unread message on his phone. Please. Meet me one more time. My heart skipped a beat. I knew that if I wanted to pretend that everything was fine, I should delete this message now and then prepare an umbrella for him to go out as if nothing had happened. But I didn't. I quietly watched as he picked up his phone. After a moment of surprise, he put it in his pocket. Then he looked at me, his eyes evasive. Aurora, I have something to do today, so I won't send you to work. My heart was breaking into pieces. But I nodded and said okay on the surface. An hour later, when I followed the navigation track to a small alley, sure enough, Nightingale was by his side. Is there anything wrong with me liking you? Is there anything wrong with me wanting to be with you? The person you love is clearly me. Why don't you want to admit your feelings? In the pouring rain, she cried and threw herself into his arms, standing on tiptoe to kiss his lips. Zephyr pushed her away again and again, but she still persevered. For the 5th time, Zephyr finally gave in. The hand that was stopping Nightingale gradually relaxed and slowly and heavily rested on her back. Then, when out a lull sigh, they were locked in an embrace as if the world had collapsed around them. I stood outside the alley for a long time. My body was icy cold, and my heart was aching. I asked myself, is that really Zephyr? Is he the Zephyr who pushed my father, who was whipping me, and shouted, if you don't care about her, leave her to me? Is he the Zephyr who shouted on the top of Changbai Mountain, I want to be with her or for the rest of my life? Looking at them, I suddenly thought of a question. If the Zephyr who cherished me as a treasure when I was 18 knew that he would treat me like this in the future, would he be so angry that he would punch himself? Unfortunately, Hadin Toshel, I don't have a time machine. So no one will ever be able to tell me the answer to this question. My reason told me that I should quarrel, make a scene, and make public the photo of them kissing, so that everyone can laugh at them on my behalf. But I still have Daisy. She's so young and she wants her hero father to come back so much. How could I put such an unbearable truth in front of her? So let it be. We hold hands and live our lives in a mess together. Only when Zephyr can't get the person he loves either will it be worthy of my efforts over the years. Right? He came home later and later, and we quarreled more and more. During the most intense quarrel, I smashed the shells he had collected right in front of him. He looked at the mess on the ground, his eyes full of accusation and grievance. And he picked up his coat and didn't come back all night. I followed the sound of crying and saw Daisy standing in the corner, wailing. My heart was suddenly engulfed by endless guilt. Is this really the life that Daisy wants? Since I was a child, I grew up amidst my parents' quarrels. My father would search everywhere for the tuition fees my mother had saved for me to buy wine. When he was drunk, he would beat me. My mother often quarreled with him about this. At that time, I vowed that I would never let my child grow up in such an environment. But now, I'm really a terrible mother. The next day, I took Daisy back to my parents' home. Zephyr called me several times, but I didn't answer. I think I need some time to sort out our relationship again. But a week later, when I took Daisy to her class, Nightingale actually appeared at the entrance of the dance class. I didn't expect that she would lose her patience before me. We hadn't seen each other for 2 years. Her baby fat had faded away, and her bright eyes had become even more charming. As soon as she saw me, tears streamed down her face like beads falling off a broken string. I asked the teacher to quickly take Daisy inside, but before I could finish speaking, she had already rushed over. She knelt in front of us and cried to Daisy, "Please, give me back your father. Okay? If it weren't for you, your father would never have abandoned me." More and more people gathered around to watch the scene. Daisy was so scared that she started to sob. My face changed. The truth that no one had ever mentioned was so easily exposed by her. In fact, I don't hate her. There's nothing wrong with her falling in love with someone. But she shouldn't have hurt an innocent child. I handed Daisy to the teacher and said that I would take her home later. When they disappeared from my sight, I raised my hand and slapped Nightingale hard on the face. She was stunned and staggered twice, almost falling down the stairs. When Zephyr arrived, this was the scene he saw. I don't know how Nightingale calculated it, but the timing was so perfect. When the second slap was about to fall, Zephyr grabbed my arm that was about to strike and looked at me coldly. Haven't you caused enough trouble? She chased us all the way to our daughter. And he still thought I was the one making trouble. I looked at him, and the pent-up anger in my chest suddenly dissipated. How stupid I was to have been entangled with a person who no longer loved me until now. In the end, it was like killing 1,000 of the enemy but losing 800 of my own. On the bustling street, I spoke in a loud voice, Zephyr, open your dog eyes and see where this is. Is it me who's making a scene? Or is your little lover trying to hurt our daughter? Reminded by me, Zephyr finally reacted. His expression changed, and he turned to look at Nightingale. The people around also started to point and whisper. Nightingale was quick-witted. Seeing that the situation was not right, she rushed over with tears in her eyes. It's not like that, Zephyr. I just wanted to come and see your child. If you hadn't left, we would have had a child by now, wouldn't we? The long-suppressed longing erupted at this moment. As soon as she cried, Zephyr softened his heart again. I watched all this coldly. How shameless. I didn't want to say anything more. I took out my phone and was about to call the police. But when I pressed the second number, Zephyr snatched the phone away from me. His tone was filled with a thick sense of weariness and anxiety at being unable to do anything about the development of the situation. Aurora, I'm already married to you. What else do you want? Will you only be satisfied when you force her to death? As soon as the words came out, both of us were stunned for a moment. I looked at him as if I were looking at a strange monster. After a long time, I finally believed that the person I had been waiting for had long since died on that night 5 years ago. Zephyr still left with Nightingale. I held Daisy and went back to my mother's house. The little one was tired from crying and fell asleep on the way. As soon as my mother saw me, she noticed that something was wrong. After settling Daisy down, she came to ask me. But I just asked her to take care of Daisy for me, and then walked out alone. I was so sad that I desperately wanted to find something to numb my restless nerves. They say that wine can relieve sorrow. But that day, no matter how much I drank, I couldn't get drunk. In the chaotic electronic music, Solace held down my wine glass. He was on patrol nearby and happened to run into me getting drunk in the bar. Sister-in-law, you can't drink anymore. I've always been someone who listens to advice. I've only done 2 extremely immoral things in my life. One was giving birth to Daisy despite my mother's dissuasion, and the other was insisting on getting drunk today. Solace couldn't stop me and took out his phone to call Zephyr. I snatched the phone from him. Don't call him. And I'll give it back to you. At that time, I still had some sense left. I knew that Solace was also a policeman. And I couldn't turn off the phone casually or throw it into the ice bucket. It's impossible to communicate with a drunk person. Solace looked at me for a while and could only nod. I gave the phone back to him. In the intoxicating lights, I asked Solace, did I do something wrong? Should I not have brought him back? Solace said anxiously, sister-in-law, Zephyr just hasn't remembered yet. It's just that the time isn't long enough. His lips moved a couple of times, as if he still wanted to defend Zephyr. But when the words came to his mouth, he couldn't even convince himself. I also fell silent. After drinking a few glasses of wine, I felt an indescribable bitterness. In the end, Solace still didn't feel at ease and drove me home. When we passed the street corner, we happened to meet Zephyr, who came out to look for me. Solace didn't say anything. He just patted him on the shoulder before leaving and said earnestly, Zephyr, there are some things I know I shouldn't say, but one should have a conscience. The year Zephyr's father passed away, Zephyr's mother had a sudden cerebral infarction. Sister-in-law took care of the feverish Daisy and arranged uncle's funeral affairs at the same time. Finally, having Joseph Wansai, she fainted in the hospital corridor in the middle of the night. Just for this. Even if she's wrong, you shouldn't make her so sad. Zephyr carried me out of the car and gave a faint in. In the bleak autumn wind, he carried me on his back and walked step by step towards the place called home. But where was our home anymore? As soon as the cold wind blew, I woke up, realizing who was carrying me on his back. I bit his shoulder. His body stiffened. But he didn't dodge. I finally let go when I was extremely tired. Zephyr, I really wish you hadn't come back. He paused in his steps. After a moment of silence, he continued to move. Aurora. So do I. In the bleak autumn wind, tears fell silently. I closed my eyes. We fell in love at 15. Missed each other at 25. And reunited at 28. I'm 30 years old this year. I want a divorce. To my surprise, Zephyr didn't agree. It was his mother who rushed over overnight after hearing the news. Aurora. It's you who wants a divorce. It's not that our Zephyr has done anything wrong to you. She had always disliked Daisy because she was a girl with a disability. She had been nagging us to have a second child. It was only when I said that I had developed a lingering illness from taking care of the two of them, and couldn't have any more children, that I managed to fob her off. Now that there was a beautiful girl who was willing to give birth to a grandson for him, she was naturally overjoyed. It's just that this matter didn't sound good if it got out, so she used high-sounding reasons to shift the blame onto me. The person I had taken care of as my own mother for several years turned out to be such a person. I wasn't particularly sad. Nor was I very indignant. I just felt disheartened. I calmly signed the divorce agreement and then handed it to Zephyr. I saw the corners of his eyes gradually turn red, and then he squatted down in front of me. Aurora. I haven't done anything wrong to you. And I haven't thought about getting a divorce from you. I believe that his body won't betray me. But what about his heart? I interrupted him. If his heart is tainted, I don't want him anymore. His face changed slightly. But he still didn't take the divorce agreement. I silently sighed. If you don't sign, I'll have the baby in my belly aborted. After throwing out this bombshell, he was stunned and looked at me suddenly. Zephyr's mother was also stunned. How is that possible? Didn't you say you couldn't have children anymore? I touched my belly. I lied to you. It's a boy. And it's already 3 months old. In fact, I didn't know whether it was a boy or a girl at all. And I didn't care. It's just that my character still hasn't changed. Since she treated our mother and daughter like this, I had to make her feel uncomfortable no matter what. Didn't she dislike Daisy? Then I'll first lift you up high and then make you fall hard from the clouds. Are you happy to have a grandson? But after the divorce, I won't let you see him. Don't want me to get a divorce? If you don't let me, I'll abort the baby. No matter how you look at it, you won't get what you want. Zephyr's mother finally fell silent. After a while, she left with the sentence, "You're a vicious woman." Zephyr thought for a long time. When I was so impatient that I stood up to leave, he dejectedly grabbed my arm. "I'll sign. Don't hurt your own body." Huh. How hypocritical. We went to change our marriage certificates on a sunny day. 2 years ago. As soon as we returned to Kin City, Zephyr took me to get the marriage certificate. He said, "Even if I don't remember, I'll still give you everything that others have." At that time, we both believed that years of companionship could make up for the lack of memories. But the truth proved that such an idea was too naive. After we left the Civil Affairs Bureau, Nightingale arrived late. She stood in front of me, holding her head high in a victorious posture. "You stole him for 2 years. It's time to give him back to me." I sneered. "Yes. I wish you a long and happy life together. However, it can't be easy to be with a man who will always feel guilty towards another woman in his heart." As soon as the words came out, Nightingale's face changed slightly. Her fingertips trembled a few times. It seemed that I had guessed it right. Zephyr stood there, mumbling my name. He probably wanted to say something more, but Nightingale interrupted him. I didn't have time to pay attention to their farce. Just then, my phone dinged. I looked down and saw a message from the hospital reminding me to go for an abortion operation in the afternoon. Yes, having fulfilled my obsession. I didn't plan to keep the baby. A child who isn't born out of love will be as pitiful as my Daisy. I ignored them and turned around and walked into the crowd. Marriage. The road ahead is long and full of difficulties. It all depends on one's conscience. I lost the bet. I don't regret it. But I won't continue to sink with them either. I thought we would part ways like this. But when I was crossing the road, Zephyr grabbed my arm. He was panting. Where are you going? I'll give you a ride. I was just about to say it wasn't necessary when my body was suddenly pushed hard, and I fell straight towards the road. Before I could react, a car came speeding towards me. Before I lost consciousness, I heard Nightingale's angry shout, "You're already divorced. What are you still pestering him for?" I was hospitalized. There was someone who came to see me every day. But I didn't remember who he was. And my mother never let him in. In the afternoon, the nurse wheeled me to have an examination. And he showed up on time and watched me from a distance. This couldn't go on like this. After the examination, I took the initiative to go to him. As I got closer, his eyes lit up step by step. They said, "You're my..." I thought for a moment. Ex-husband. As soon as these two words came out, the light in his eyes dimmed immediately. When the nurse was chatting, she said that he had once forgotten me and fallen in love with another person. So we got a divorce. I didn't have much affection for such a person. What do you want from me? My attitude was cold. Just then, let out a low sigh. A leaf fell on my shoulder. He bent down and wanted to brush it off for me. When a strange breath invaded, and his hand was still a few centimeters away from me, I instinctively dodged. Suddenly, something seemed to break in his eyes. The moment he looked at me, his eyes turned red. "Aurora. I remember everything. Don't treat me like this." Oh. I forgot. He did remember everything. But how should I treat him? In the eyes of others, he is a hero who survived a fight against the underworld. But without the halo of a lover, he is just an ordinary person among the multitude. To me, he is no different from a passerby. I calmly averted my gaze. "Sorry. I'm not used to it." Hearing me say this, he seemed to regain some of his rationality. He took out a diary from his bag and forced himself to read it to me. I didn't stop him. Because I was also curious about what kind of mood I had when I loved the man in front of me. He opened a page at random. August 15, 2023. Sunny today. Zephyr cooked. He made a yellow croaker. But I suddenly remembered that he originally didn't like eating fish. He said that fish has many bones and is difficult to cook. But he has bought fish 4 times this week. Who is he missing? September 3, 2023. Cloudy Nightingale is back. She was all alone and being bullied by others. I'm really bad. I actually don't want Zephyr to go and save her. But in the end, he still went. That's okay. This way, having fulfilled my obsession, when I wake up from my dreams at midnight, I won't feel too guilty to fall asleep again. October 9, 2023. Rainy, the teacher called me. When I rushed to the school, Daisy was the only one left in the classroom. It was supposed to be Zephyr who came to pick up Daisy today, but the teacher said his phone was turned off. When he came in the evening, he came to apologize to me with a look of guilt on his face. He said he had gone to find Nightingale. Someone was causing trouble at her workplace. It's the first time she's come to such a far place. And I was worried she'd be scared. But what about Daisy? Daisy's hearing aid fell off. She was scared too. It sounds like you don't love me. I interrupted him. I don't know which nerve of Zephyr's this sentence touched. And he couldn't continue reading. His eyes were flustered. And he desperately flipped through the pages, as if trying to find evidence of our past love. No, I love you. I really do. He murmured to himself. It was like he was trying to convince me. And also like he was deceiving himself. March 12, 2020. Cloudy director Zhang personally came to inform me. He said Zephyr was a hero. He also said that the dead can't be brought back to life and asked me to accept the loss and move on. I couldn't help but think of the day he left. Really? If I had known that was the last time we would meet, I would have dressed more beautifully. May 7, 2020. Sunny. I had already reached the rooftop, but I fainted before I could stand on the railing. Solace sent me to the hospital. When I woke up, he said there was a baby growing in my belly. On that day, Aurora died. Daisy's mother survived. July 6, 2021. Rainy. On a rainy day, Daisy was locked outside by other children. They called her a child without a father. I was taking care of Zephyr's mother in the hospital, and it was too late when I found out about this. Due to a high fever, Daisy lost her hearing in both ears and needs to wear a hearing aid for life. I only cried a little bit. When I walked into the ward, I forced a smile. Mom was right. The person I could rely on is no longer here. I still have Daisy. I have to be brave. By the time he finished reading this, Zephyr's hand was shaking uncontrollably. A tear fell on the paper, making a clear sound. He reached out to wipe the tears from the corner of his eye, looked up, and stared at me with a pained expression. Aurora, I don't understand. We were together for so many years. And I even swore to your parents that I would protect you forever. Even if I forgot. Why would I treat you like this? Why indeed? I smiled. Because the word forever in people's mouths is only used to describe the current passion. It can neither measure time nor represent loyalty. After that day, I didn't see Zephyr for a long time. The doctor said I was recovering well, and that I could go through the discharge procedures in the afternoon. When my mom went to handle the formalities, I saw that familiar figure again at the door. He was struggling with a girl and didn't notice me. Please believe me. I really didn't mean it. I didn't expect her to lose her balance. What do you want me to do for you to forgive me? Should I kneel down to her? Zephyr. I really can't live without you. But Zephyr was just cold and pried her fingers apart one by one. Nightingale. The fact that I don't hate you is already the biggest concession I can make. The girl was stunned and stood there blankly, mumbling. What are you talking about? Don't you know what I'm talking about? Zephyr's tone suddenly rose. As if afraid of being noticed. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and lowered his voice. In the second month after I went missing, the search and rescue team came to look for me. Why did you say I wasn't there at that time? He looked at Nightingale, took out a ring from his pocket, and his handsome face was filled with a look of sorrow. Also, I went out. You took my ring and lied to me, saying that you were originally my girlfriend. But that ring was the one I bought for Aurora to propose to her after my mission ended. You used my lost memories to keep me, and let Aurora suffer for 3 years on my behalf. So during this period, he had been investigating this. How painful it was for her when she gave birth to Daisy. And how tired she was when she took care of my parents for me. I didn't know any of this. Zephyr's voice got lower and lower, full of endless regret and self-mockery. But all of this seemed so pale and powerless in the face of that heavy diary. No. Nightingale shook her head desperately. But with the facts right in front of her, she couldn't refute. In the end, she could only change the topic. What about me? What should I do? My father wants me to marry the person he has chosen for me. I even cut off my relationship with him to come to you. I only have you. Zephyr. Will you come back with me? Nightingale tried to grab Zephyr. And there was a hint of flattery in her tone. But this time he didn't hold back and suddenly shook off Nightingale's hand. His movement stopped the moment he turned around and saw me. There was a deathly silence all around. 10 seconds. 20 seconds. 30 seconds. After a long time, Zephyr put away his shock and slowly walked towards me. When he stood in front of me, he was still holding a ring in his palm. Aurora. I know I was wrong. Can you accept me again? His hoarse voice was trembling, with a hint of uncertain nervousness. There was another dead silence. I looked at his red-rimmed eyes again, and then at the ring in his palm. I actually thought it wasn't as interesting as the scene just now. So I smiled slightly, with a gentle but distant attitude, although I've forgotten a lot of things. I also know that when my memory is incomplete, I can't just casually agree to someone's proposal. What do you think? He was stunned, looking as dejected as a stray dog. I don't know how Daisy found out about my memory loss. When we got home, she timidly threw herself into my arms. Mom, Do you still remember me? I tapped her little nose. Of course I do. Her voice was plaintive and pitiful. Then tell me who I am? I held her in my arms tenderly and smiled. You are my most lovely and sweetest daughter. Tears slowly welled up in her eyes. After a moment, she hugged my neck tightly and wouldn't let go. I was so scared. I thought you had forgotten me. Mom. How could I? I hugged her back tightly. As if I was hugging the whole world that brings me both joy and sorrow. I told her, silly Daisy. True love can't be forgotten. And what can be forgotten must not be true love. Time flies. In the blink of an eye. 2 years have passed. Daisy entered primary school safely. Zephyr didn't make things difficult for me after all. When we got divorced, he transferred most of the property to my name. With this money and my own savings, I prepared to open my second cake shop. Soon after, the shop opened on the commercial street, and Solace sent a flower basket. His injured leg still hurts on cloudy and rainy days. After greeting me, he took the initiative to take on the task of handing out flyers, and let me go inside and sit down. When it was almost time for a meal, I told the clerk to take care of the business and invited Solace to go out and have a meal with me. We had simple yang chun noodles. As we ate and chatted, Solace suddenly sighed, Sister. When you resigned, I really didn't expect you to do so well with your side business. I used to be a top student in the forensic science major. But after Zephyr went missing, in order to have more time to take care of my family, I chose a more flexible career. I smiled. You're amazing too. I heard you've been promoted to a police inspector. He also smiled. When the corners of his mouth turned up, dimples appeared on both sides of his cheeks. He has been by my side for the past 2 years. I'm not unaware of his feelings. But it has taken me so much energy to tear the person who occupied most of my life out of my heart. I still treat people sincerely. But I no longer place high hopes on anyone. Then I suddenly realized that the biggest price I paid for this entanglement in the mortal world was not the betrayal of my lover, but the loss of the courage to fall in love with someone else again. Because I understand that vows are only valid at the moment they are spoken. Solace took another sip of wine. I sensed what he wanted to say and interrupted him first. When you get married, I will definitely give you a big red envelope. Little brother. He is a very smart person. When he heard me say this, he quickly understood the meaning behind my words. He was slightly taken aback. Then raised his glass and clinked it with mine. Okay. I will definitely let you know when the time comes. He looked at me, and his smile was filled with bitterness. Aurora. Sometimes, I really think you haven't forgotten the past. Is that so? Maybe. I replied indifferently. After paying the bill, we went back to the shop together. Unexpectedly, we met Zephyr at the door of the shop. I rarely saw him in the past 2 years. When he came to visit Daisy, I usually stayed indoors and didn't go out. Over time, knowing that I didn't want to see him, he stopped disturbing me. But today, for some reason, he came all the way to the door of the shop. He looked very tired. His leather jacket was half open, and he was leaning against the roadside, smoking. I remember he never smoked before. Solace was very tactful and left. I nodded and resisted the urge to tell him that I would bring him some new products to taste next time. If there's no chance of starting something, it's better not to give hope. A strange emotion flashed in Zephyr's eyes. But in the end, he didn't say anything. He stamped out the cigarette but then walked a few steps to stand in front of me. Is there something? I asked. He touched the tip of his nose before stammering, It's nothing. I'm going on a mission again. In Thailand. I don't know when I'll be back. Before I leave, I came to see you and Daisy. I nodded in understanding and then looked at my watch. Daisy hasn't finished school yet. You can wait for a while. He smiled, and a trace of bitterness crossed the corner of his mouth. I won't wait. I'm about to board the plane soon. I let out an memph. After a long silence, Zephyr suddenly spoke up and asked tentatively, Aurora, is it really impossible for us to start over? Just then, let out a low sigh. A gust of wind blew, and the fallen leaves danced in the air. I turned my head and pointed behind him. Look, there's a small tornado. He turned around to look. Where? It's gone. What's gone? I looked him straight in the eye. Everything is gone. Just like a broken mirror. Even if it's glued back together, the cracks are still there. Zephyr's expression gradually dimmed. At the extreme, he actually smiled. As he smiled, some glistening tears welled up in the corners of his eyes. After a long time, he finally nodded. Okay. Goodbye, Aurora. That tone of pretending to be relaxed was exactly like the words he said to me when we first met. Hey. Just sit here. Aurora. I watched his figure getting farther and farther away. And my heart suddenly ached for no reason. But after the pain, there was a deep sense of relief. We have been together for 15 years. How many 15-year periods can there be in a person's life? When I turned around, all the past laughter, scolding, and anger unfolded in my mind one by one. So vivid, yet so distant. I think I didn't cry. It was my instinct that shed tears for me. I suddenly remembered the poem written on the blackboard on the day I first met him. I want to buy osmanthus flowers and load wine together. But in the end, it's not like the journey of our youth. It was quite fitting for the occasion. In fact, Solace was right. I haven't forgotten anything from beginning to end. I just understand that this is the best ending for us. Give you what you wish for and set myself free. Just like this cake shop. Zephyr used to queue up for an hour every Friday to buy me the limited edition cake from this shop. Later, he lost his memory. Every time we passed by here hand in hand, his unfamiliar expression would burn me deeply. But it doesn't matter now. I bought it. As long as I want to eat the cake, I can make it myself at any time. In the warm and gentle sunshine, I wiped away my tears and made peace with myself from 15 years ago. I forgive you, Zephyr. Goodbye, Zephyr. Zephyr's side story 1. This is my 3rd year of being an undercover agent in Thailand. Many times I couldn't hold on anymore. But whenever I thought of Aurora, I felt that I had to go back alive. Even if she didn't want to see me. When I couldn't fall asleep, I often sat by the window and recalled our past. At the age of 15, she transferred to a school in Ken City. Facing the exclusion of her classmates, I calmly pulled out the chair beside me and said, Hey, having till so mind session. Just sit here. At the age of 25, a week before we were going to get the marriage certificate, the bureau sent me on an undercover mission. Worried about her safety, I broke up with her. But she grabbed my sleeve and said with tears in her eyes that she would definitely wait for me. But now I'm 35 years old. I have everything. Except for our relationship. I can't blame anyone. Because I hurt her. Even though I first noticed Nightingale, because her little action of brushing her hair was exactly the same as that of Aurora in the depths of my memory. I still suppressed the doubt in my heart and didn't delve into the full of holes illusion. Because it was the only thing related to the past that I could hold on to. Over time, I began to confuse cause and effect. I thought that I really loved Nightingale. And I only had a sense of responsibility towards Aurora. Until she was pushed down by Nightingale and crashed head-on into a car. Large chunks of memories finally began to resurface. Outside the operating room, my hands and feet turned cold. When Aurora's mother came, she slapped me hard and scolded me. Aurora has sacrificed so much for you. You're a bastard. She told me to get out, but I didn't. I knelt down and begged her to let me wait until Aurora was out of danger. When she was tired of scolding, she stopped trying to stop me. But when Aurora woke up, the first words she said when she saw me were, "Who are you? Do we know each other?" At that moment, I felt as if I had fallen into an ice cave. She loved me so much. How could she forget me? How was it possible for her to forget me? I was immersed in pain and couldn't extricate myself. But for the past 5 years, had she been living in such bitterness and grievance? I'm really a complete bastard. I began to try to use her method to awaken the memories between us, hoping to see a trace of love for me again in those clear eyes. But there was none. When she saw me, her eyes were so unfamiliar. I boomeranged that I threw myself stabbed straight into my heart again 2 years later. I dragged my heavy heart home to pack my things, and accidentally found the diary she had written. Without flipping through it carefully, I couldn't wait to go to her. I was sure that when she saw my handwriting, she would believe what I said. But I didn't expect that I was the one who couldn't stand it first. Those words that condensed countless sorrows and accusations shattered me in just a few moments. What a precious person my Aurora is. Look at what I've done. Although we don't meet often, I often go outside the school and wait for Aurora to pick up Daisy. She has raised our daughter very well. Daisy has never been inferior or timid because of her differences. How many times I couldn't help thinking that if there hadn't been that accident, what a happy family of 3 we would have been. I would go home with them, have meals together, and play parent-child games together. In the 2 years since the divorce, guilt and regret have been like a lingering illness, tormenting me so much that I can't sleep at night. I finally understand that among all the words about regret, the saddest one is not, I can't, but, I could have. I can't hold on anymore. Especially when I accidentally soar or staring blankly at a photo of our past. I know that she hasn't forgotten. She just doesn't have any expectations of me anymore. So when Director Zhang asked me if I was willing to go undercover in a mafia organization in Thailand, I agreed without hesitation. In the 5th year of being an undercover agent, I collected enough evidence and, together with the Thai police, captured hundreds of gangsters on the spot. Director Zhang said that I was sure to get the first-class merit this time. But when I received that medal, what I thought was, is this enough to make her or give me another chance? Before returning to China, I despicably lied to her that I wanted to see Daisy, and she agreed to bring Daisy to the airport to pick me up. After not seeing her for a long time, Daisy was still as cute as ever. She gave me a big hug and raised her thumb, saying, "Daddy is a great hero. She didn't make me a bastard feel ashamed in front of my daughter. I know it's all Aurora's credit." I looked at her gratefully. That's when the accident happened. A dark-skinned man stood in the crowd, staring at me viciously. I recognized him as the adopted son of the mafia boss. On the day of the operation to close in on the criminals, he didn't show up at the transaction site and thus escaped. I instinctively protected Aurora behind me. Half a second later, the man fired several shots in a row. The crowd scattered, and the bullets penetrated my chest and scapula. At the same time as I fell, there was also a familiar figure. It was Nightingale. She was so scared that she fled around, but was hit in the leg bone by a stray bullet. She was seriously injured, and I'm afraid she will never be able to stand up again. Fortunately, hadn't fulfilledly, there were only 6 bullets in that gun. Soon after the gunshots rang out, the security personnel arrived at the scene and controlled the man. Aurora pressed on my wound and cried out in despair, "Zephyr! Hold on. The ambulance is coming soon. I told you to hold on. Do you hear me?" But my life was flowing out with the blood, making me unable to move. I could only try my best to squeeze out a smile and say to her, "I'm sorry. Forgive me." It was only at the last moment of my life that I dared to make such a shameless request. "I know you don't want to have another life with me. So in this life, at least let me ask for your forgiveness." Unfortunately, heading fulfilledly, I didn't hear her answer. The darkness came, and I lost all my senses. There was only one spot of light guiding me forward. In that white light, I saw Aurora at the age of 15. She walked up to me timidly and asked with her eyes if she could sit here. I looked at her, and her face was so young and beautiful. But this time, I finally didn't pull out the chair. She gave me a disappointed look and sat in the empty seat in the last row. The scorching sun shone through the spotless window lattice, making it hard for people to open their eyes. On the blackboard, the teacher wrote the second line of that poem, "I will invite the east wind to the small building, but spring doesn't allow me to look back again. Aurora, I wish you hadn't met me. Aurora, you must be very happy. Aurora, spring doesn't allow me to look back again."